This is part something, I'm not sure what number, a few, of my explanation of how the AVD guitar cabs came about. And the final part of the puzzle, slightly unusual thing, confuses people, is the fact that they have a low cut switch in the back of them. Now I'm going to show you it with the Reformer 112. The Upsetter 110 came first, and the reason the 110 came first was because it's harder to do things with smaller enclosures and smaller speakers when it comes to sound, certainly in the context of live sound with guitar and bass stuff. There is a reason that the live sound speakers we use are pretty big cabinets and things like that. So that's the, that was an early prototype of the Upsetter. As you can see, it doesn't have anything in, which is why it's particularly hilariously light. This is a production Reformer. See, it is, there we are, hold them side by side, bigger, same badges for scale. So this one that I'm so elegantly holding with one hand has got an Alnico cream in. I'll be honest with you, I'd not really used Alnico speakers before, and I was just aware of them being considered rather nice. But the guitarist I'd worked with hadn't used them. I play bass. We bassists don't tend to use Alnico speakers unless we're doing something weird at low volumes in the studio, that sort of thing. But the Alnico speakers that Celestion make have turned out to be very nice indeed. They're not standard in our cabs because they are expensive and not everyone wants them. But for the amount extra they are, if tonally they're in your direction, they're good. So this is the Alnico Cream, which is a super versatile, very high powerful speaker. Probably the most versatile, possibly the most versatile speaker Celestion make, actually. It's really good. You can get really heavy with it and, you know, full bore distortion, or you can do really pretty clean tones and sort of everything in between, and it handles tons of power. So the reason I'm waving this particular cab around is because I wanted to show you in the back here. Here's the back plate. Now, first thing you'll notice is it doesn't look like it's got 1/4 inch inputs, but it does. That's what's in the middle of them. I'll grab a lead to show you. There we go. So this, quite an unusual sort of lead, this speaker wire 1/4 inch at one end, and this one happens to have a speaker on at the other end, which means if you use one of these on your cab, no one will take it, because who else wants something like that? So here we go. Can take the speak on. That's the locking clicky thingy. Rather satisfying. You can use either socket, they're in parallel. They have two because that's what we do in the bass cabs. I couldn't see a reason to do a different sort of dish for the guitar cab, because sometimes you might want to connect a second cab. They're in parallel, so it's a daisy chain, so the impedance goes down. Matched impedance preferably. But you can also, which most of you will be doing, stick a 1/4 inch in it. So that goes straight in the middle like that. Doesn't matter which one you plug into. If you want, you could also take the other one out to a DI box if you've got a DI box that takes high power, like an Avalon U5 or something like that. So it doesn't provide a dummy load, but will deal with the high voltage output from your amp if you want to get a high level DI signal. Of course, if you've got a lead like that, you could leave it connected all the time. And I'm making this look really elegant, aren't I? Shove that there whilst you transport it. Other thing you'll notice, this is a slightly different shape here. So this clears the Alnico's deeper magnet, whilst also keeping the tuning frequency where we want it and keeping the sound doing what we want. So the Alnico ones are different. You cannot fit an Alnico speaker in a stock Reformer cab. It has to have the Alnico AVD. That's in the 12-inch cabs. The 10-inch cabs, the Alnico 10s do not have as deep a magnet, and they fit just fine. But I do think, though, that is quite a nice feature from a sort of styling point of view if you spend much time looking at the back of the cab. Also, they do look good. They are worth the extra money if you have the money and it's your sort of thing. But yeah, so that other thing here, this switch, so that normal response, but then flick it the other way and it cuts the lows, it reduces the lows. And the reason for that is that in the world of guitar cabs, basically there are two sorts of animal. There's the sealed ones and there's the open back ones. So closed back, open back. The closed back ones, because the cabs really aren't big enough for the speakers that are in them, the frequency response sort of goes up. It gets shoved upwards by this sort of increased resonance. If the box was larger, they'd go lower and then they'd roll, but without the hump, and then they'd roll off lower down. But what happens is putting the speakers in a box that isn't big enough raises their resonant frequency and increases the Q, so they're more prone to resonating, so they become more efficient, though they do get boomier. The transient response goes off a bit when the Q gets that high. And you end up with this humping response and then a rapid fall off below the resonant frequency of the system. So that's what your typical sort of Marshall 412 style cabs do. Your open back cabs, now they don't have the back pressure in the box raising the resonant frequency of the speakers, but they do suffer from this cancellation, which is what happens with all open baffle speakers, where the sound from the back meets the sound out of the front, and below, once the wavelengths get long, the wavelengths are still in phase with each other. So, well, they're in reverse phase. So as the speaker pushes at the front, that's compressing, but the sound from the back is rarefying, it's expanding the air. And when the wavelengths are long, they just meet and cancel. So you get a 6 decibel per octave roll off from the open baffle cancellation, and you get a 12 decibel per octave roll off from the way the speaker is rolling off below its resonant frequency. What's happening here, you actually get on the sealed cab, it's more like a 24 decibels per octave roll off. It's a very steep one. Unusually steep, but I think that's because you've squeezed the speakers into such a small thing, so you've got the sealed cab, closed box, 12 dB per octave roll off, and the speaker itself below resonance acting together. So our open back 212, like a Fender Twin or something like that, that starts rolling off higher up. It doesn't hump. I will say these are very approximate lines, and these are small signal parameters, and guitar speakers, as soon as you start playing vaguely loud, you're way beyond small signal parameters and things start to run into non-linearity. But this gives you a vague idea. This difference between the red line and the green line, that's that chunky thing. That is that chunky palm muty thing. This is why your rockers and your metalers tend towards your closed back 412s, or closed back cabs in general. And these open back 212s are not generally used for things where you want the guitar to be grunty and thumpy. So there's your difference. Our cabs, the AVD cabs, because they are not closed back and they are not open back, they're AVD, which is a combination of ported behaviour at lower frequencies and an improved open back behaviour at higher frequencies, actually works more like this. They go low and then they roll off below the tuning frequency. The Radical is the lowest tuned of our models, but they're all in a similar ballpark in that they all basically roll off. Even the Upsetter, the smallest one, 110, that rolls off from about this point onwards, so similar to your big sealed 412, and the others, so that would drop a bit sooner, and then the Reformer a bit later, and then the Uprising a bit later, and the Radical the lowest. There are options for us to do things that operate lower if there's interest from 7-stringers, baritone, things like that. We do already have people playing things like that through our cabs, but if we want to do some specialist stuff that reaches low, I'm up for it. I'm curious. I think it's fun to fill the niches because we can do that because of the way we operate. If we can work out a cool design, we can just add it to the stable. As long as we can sell them in a way that doesn't confuse people, then I'm up for that, absolutely. Interesting stuff. So the low cut switch, that just adds a little component into the circuit that modifies the load that the amp is seeing and causes the response to roll off. And it rolls off, once that switch is engaged, in a fairly similar way to an open back cab. It's going to vary slightly depending on the speaker that's in there and depending on the cab it's in, but it is generally a roll off somewhere around what happens with the open 212. So it adds a 6 dB per octave roll off to the inherent roll off within the cab. What actually happens lower down, so somewhere around the resonance, you actually get a sort of flattening of the roll-off, and then it continues below. So it's a slightly shelved behaviour. So it drops, flattens out a bit, and then drops again. But I wasn't going to keep redrawing this repeatedly because I'm not known as one of the world's great artists. If Leonardo were running barefaced, you'd get much better drawings. Then again, if Michelangelo were doing it, we might have to point it at the ceiling, which would be less efficient, but I don't think he really got into engineering like Mr. Da Vinci. So there we go. We're trying to give you options with this cab. We're not trying to make a jack of all trades, we're trying to make a better cabinet for playing guitar through in almost all contexts. Chatting to one of my guys just now when he armed me with a cup of tea, which is what we all need, certainly in England, and the rest of the UK, I should say, for making films and such like. He mentioned that he doesn't tend to use the low-cut switch on gigs because he likes the fullness of tone with the bigger sound, the bigger lows, but in the studio he absolutely uses it because he just doesn't need that clutter that, to be honest, the engineer might get rid of anyway. So, something to think about. It's just a little extra feature, and all you have to do is flick that little toggle at the back. And as a reminder, don't be scared of the speak-ons. They're great. You can use them, but you do not need to replace your old cables. You can still use the trusty 1/4" jack like that. I suppose actually for storage you could always keep that clipped in like that. It's quite neat, isn't it? Leave the speak-on plugged in all the time and then just unplug that to go into your amp. Tidy solution I hadn't considered there. There's another way of doing it. Anyway, a bit more on how the barefaced AVD guitar cabs came about. I'll be back with another something at some point, so thank you for listening. Ask me questions, because I've kind of got to the point that I've forgotten what I've already talked about, so it'd be good to know what you've seen and what you're still wondering about that I haven't talked about, because I'd rather not watch me talking again, because I'm getting really tired of my own voice. If you're not tired of my voice and want to hear more, do tell me what you'd like to hear more about. Thank you, I've been Alex from Barefaced, and I will see you next time.